After a multitude of Incredible Hulks, a half-century of Batmans, and Star Wars materials written into every type of media available, the idea of a continuous universe was worlds away. While sequels were prevalent, so were the total reboots and pretending that maybe none of this had ever happened. While some multiverses gave us content across every available form of media that tied into a beautiful cascade of source material and evolving new series, others struggled with the ever-changing shifts in leadership that zigzagged continuity into whims of leaders. Caperdoodle, do that dandy so we can dive deeper. It wasn't until Marvel gave us the MCU that we could really begin to understand how a universe could be translated into a multi-format experience. After Marvel execs spent most of the 90s selling off the rights to their characters to every movie studio in existence, Marvel took the remnants of their characters and turned them into a multi-movie franchise event across more than a decade, minus, of course, of Spider-Man, most of X-Men, and of course, anyone you've seen in Netflix original. What's been the most interesting is how some Marvel has managed to tie these characters back into their established universe once those rights have returned. A major plot point of the newly released Spider-Man No Way Home, and Spider-Man No Way Home generously ties in universes of Sony-led Spider-Man into the existing universe of Marvel, using the multiverse it established via a vague mention in Thor: The Dark World. It's okay if you don't remember that. Coming from someone who could barely write a proper outline for an essay throughout most of my schooling, it's incredibly impressive to see, through the MCU, though the MCU isn't without faults, as many have pointed out, from Zola being technologically in custody during the time he was supposedly making the Winter Soldier, several appearances of Cap's shield, and the most recent issue of How Does Electro Know Peter Parker's Identity? On the flip side of this coin sits the Star Wars universe, known properly as the Star Wars Extended Universe. What started as a universe built for toys continued to expand and grow across all platforms in seemingly well thought out and flawless universe with common leadership heading the charge. However, burnouts of different media enterprises have led it into confusion over time, where previously sworn-in storylines have been removed from the canon and replaced by entirely new concepts. The large source of these retcon issues stem from the prequels, from the newly found measurability of midichlorians to Palpatine cloning himself, and to the thousands of visual continuity errors from remasters that went from theaters to VHS and to DVD, and now even streaming. The Star Wars fandom has endless opportunities to argue within itself, and especially as the Disney buyout in 2012 brought on a completely new leadership with new ideas to capitalize on the Star Wars IP materials, as many of the side projects among animation in the Star Wars Extended Universe lacking centralized leadership to keep continuing a story within the tiny details. Whew. But the question of all of this is just how necessary is the continuity to the entertainment? Cape, what are your thoughts here? Nelly?
Which one? Me? Her?
What are your thoughts on continuity in general?
I think if it's handled well, it can be very, very useful tool. I mean, I've always wondered how Marvel does it so well, because they have to tie up loose ends and all that, and plus with all the Sony stuff before Spider-Man and all that, like how sticky it can be. I feel like, okay, where's this character at in this timeline? And when I was watching Star Wars, I was like, okay, when are we? Because if it's done well, it's very satisfying. Like, oh wow, he was there, or stuff like that. I think a good place that does is Futurama, but overall, I think it's very important because there are someone having the strings to connect everything to where it needs to go. That's just a fan, so it's kind of a responsibility in a way.
Yeah, 100%. Littlest Nelly, why is continuity so important to maintain?
continuity is important whenever you look at the way that media is evolving right now. I think that Spider-Man's box office success, where others have failed, is a really, really great example of that. Because people wanted to continue being interested in the evolving story of the Marvel Universe, they wanted to see what happens next, right? Versus other movies that came out and said, okay, this is a whole new story. You're not already invested. Let's make sure that, you're just going to go into the theaters in the risk of a pandemic and just maybe you'll like them. Maybe you won't. I think continuity here is important because it keeps people involved in the franchise. It keeps people coming back. When you ruin that continuity and things don't really have an impact on each other, I think people become uninterested and uninvested.
Yeah, 100%. We've seen a lot of different ways that people have played with continuity recently, right? We have some examples even in the image here. Loki, and the MCU in general, right? The whole idea of Infinity War, they really changed how it even interacted in the comics into something that wasn't just this big cosmic universe fight. No, we're actually going to go through and change our own timeline within the universe, create this big event that really impacts how all these things interact with each other. And continuity now in a lot of stories that we've seen that plays with time, continuity is no longer just a straight line, right? Do you think that this change with continuity being something that can kind of loop back on into itself, and people can go through and create these retcons and splinter in the ways that it has? Do you think this is a good change for the media that we've seen recently? Cape, I'll start with you.
So I think it is a good thing, but it also depends on what we're watching, because sometimes it just seems very jarring to keep on going to the past. But also, like, I think it is very satisfying when places do. It just depends on the universe, because I haven't seen Doctor Who, but you liked it because it's just all over the place. I get tired personally of Saul because they keep on going back to the past, and you're like, okay, like, we get it, but it's good to tie up loose ends, but after a while it just gets so dang annoying.
Right.
But I think it is satisfying and it needs to be done, but also some places don't even need that. But at least they are aware of it. And this is just continuity as a whole. I'm not really talking about retconning.
One show that I think that played a lot around with continuity in a way that was really cool was actually Arrow on the CW, where he was telling the story of his whole, essentially coming of age story, his hero story, his origin story, alongside his origin story within the city as well. So you have these kind of like parallel stories at the same time with flashbacks. There's a lot of stories that use flashbacks and use continuity in that way too. Just how necessary do you think continuity is to enjoying entertainment, right? Do you think this issue is well, first off, let's start with that. How necessary is continuity to enjoying entertainment, Little Snelly?
I think it's not 100% necessary. Like, I think there are some things that even live within the same universe that I wouldn't consider like continuous, right? Like, I think the Tarantino universe is a really good aspect of that. They live within the same universe, and technically there's some parallels, but it's not like they're one ongoing story that depends on the one before. They've just got cute little tie-ins to each other. And then of course there are other movies, other events that are completely independent that are really, really fun. I've read any of the like 7,000 Joker origin stories that have happened within Batman comics. I find 90% of them still very enjoyable, even though none of them have continuity. They all just completely do their own thing in their own tangent. So long as they're independently well done, I think that's totally fine and not necessary.
Yeah, 100%. Kate, I'll ask you the same question. How necessary is continuity to enjoying entertainment?
You put it very well, Nelly. It's just what's in canon of that series. It is very necessary because it shows that people did their homework, that they connected the dots of this belongs here, and all that. But also, continuity can get sticky.
I've got to push back. I think it's bigger than both of that, guys. I think continuity is important because, like, if I look at stuff in the Star Wars universe, right, and I know that it's like in the extended universe or something like that, I know it's not canon, it doesn't feel as legitimate. It doesn't feel as good. It doesn't feel as a part of the rest of of everything with it. There's a legitimacy to having that continuity, knowing that this is it's not just an argument of continuity of what is canon as well. We've talked about what is canon before, and I think that to me that is pretty important to still have that aspect. Now you can have stuff that's outside and exist within its own, like you can have your Joker movies, but I think that there is some value to have. I mean, the success of the MCU has been the ability to have one continuity and one timeline throughout a multitude of movies. So I think that there is an important aspect there. Right?
Yeah, I can agree to that definitely, but my question to you is like, explain continuity or canon to someone that doesn't understand it. I have 2 nephews, and trying to explain that to them is really confusing, but it's necessary because we're vested in the mythos. But try to explain, why is this Batman different than, I could go on forever on that, but
well, I think continuity and canon are 2 different things. Continuity is what is within this timeline, right? What is within, you can have 2 different continuities that have 2 different stories within it. You can, like, they are very similar in concept. Like, what is canon is like what exists within that universe, right? Spider-Ham is canon within the Spider-Verse in the Miles Morales. What's the animated one? It was Into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse, yeah. That's canon within that universe, right? But it's not. Spider-Ham has never been canon in the MCU, right? It would be inappropriate to say that it's within that, but it has its own timeline. All of those different things. The continuity of Spider-Ham exists within only Spider-Ham's universe and with only Spider-Ham's comics, right? That exists within its own succession there, and his events in relevance to Into the Spider-Verse have their own continuity of how they chronologically line up and match up so that these things still connect, right? You can't, essentially, like, one of the things I noticed in that's like a small continuity error when you're in The Big Lebowski, right? When he gets in the cab, he spills like half of his drink on the way in, right? And like he comes in, he takes like a little sip. There's only like a little bit left right there. And then you look over at the boss and he says something. And then you look back and his glass is full again, right? Because he's got more conversation. So he's got to have more drink, right? He never poured himself another glass. Nothing else is there. That's like a continuity error. That's just a visual continuity error, right? But canon-wise, his drink was always there. It was always some amount of full. It doesn't really matter how appropriate it was. It just, the only thing that's canon about it is that there was a drink that was there. Right? You're talking about the how it. I don't know. I feel like I'm over explaining it at this point.
No.
Does everyone follow me?
Yeah, I think there's also an important distinction here too between kind of what we're talking about, and you touched on a bit in the intro of Star Wars, right? There's visual continuity errors, like what I would consider almost editing errors, and then there's storyline continuity errors, right? So you mentioned the fact that like within the timeline that they discussed within the MCU, Zola was technically in jail at the time that he was also supposedly making Winter Soldier. That is a timeline continuity error that to me is a big error, but it doesn't super affect my enjoyment of the material, right? But there are certain Star Wars movies where the continuity errors because of visual editing do affect my enjoyment because it decreases the level of immersion that I have, right? When I hear a lightsaber go off and then you walk into the next scene and there's no lightsaber there, and I'm like, cool, that probably was a part of the storyline that got edited out and just wasn't continued and touched on. Like, I think that those are 2 very different ones. So to your point about whether it's necessary to enjoy, I don't think that continuity in storyline is necessary so long as they're meant to be independent, right? You don't have to build out that story. But I do think that if they live together, they should be well done. Otherwise, it ruins your immersive experience. You can't get as involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is critical. Continuity, in a basic sense, is critical to maintaining immersion within the story, and as you're saying, when you as just as your example as you gave before, if you hear a lightsaber go off and you go into the next room and there's not a lightsaber there, you're not thinking about the Star Wars story anymore. You're then thinking about the editing process, and you're thinking externally. You're no longer immersed in that story, and I think that is a big, crucial part about continuity that is important. There's a lot of times where they look at people that point out continuity errors as if they're just pencil pushers and being that about kind of things, but it's more than that. It does have an ability to take the reader out of it. Do you think that this is an issue that is unique to cinema? Little Snelly, we'll start with you.
I think it's easier to point out with cinema because it's so easy to rewatch it, right? Like, it's so easy to go back and say, hey, that's really, really weird. Like, I have both read The Shining and watched The Shining. When I watch The Shining, I see continuity errors that are actually very intentional. Like, you talked about Big Lebowski and the glass. There are several scenes where Jack Nicholson's character, his glass gets refilled whenever he's near the devil, right? That's like a really, really niche editing thing that's really, really cool. And then when I read the book, I don't think that I would ever pick up on that unless the author specifically laid it out for me that that's what was happening. Like, I would notice that he just took more sips than would be necessary of his drink over time. I think it's a little more prevalent in comics and other forms of visual media. But I think it is less so because it's less available to watch readily. Like, I'm not going to notice Arrowverse continuity errors because I'm not going to rewatch all of the 4,000 episodes of all of them combined. Unless somebody on Reddit does pencil push and tell me, I'm probably not going to remember the final details of that much media.
Right. Same question to you, Kate.
So I think that it is very unique, and it is also very in visual elements because you do see it. But sometimes continuity can be forgiven because the reason you said about The Shining, that could be, they put it there because he always wants to feel Jack's drink again, or something like that. But also continuity is, how to explain it, it can also be a callback in a way, and it can be used as a joke. I mean, I remember when I was editing stuff for school, you guys were talking about actual continuity errors, in editing. Never show someone smoking a cigarette because that is the most pain in the butt because you have, how long was it? And sometimes you have the scripty who actually writes down everything that says, hey, oh, this is how this was, this is how this was. They take pictures and all that. Essentially, they're leeway between production and post-production. But nonetheless, I think if continuity is done well, it can be very, very good. And it's not just unique to cinema, it's just easier to notice because of visual elements and stuff like that. And I guess it's easier to pick up because it is easier to rewatch and resurface and all that. It's just harder to pick up in other mediums.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so obviously we touch a lot on movies on this topic. Do you think this? Do you find any other examples where this happens? We talked a little bit about TV shows early. Have you seen any continuity issues in comics? Cape, I think you could probably answer this one best.
I mean, it's kind of difficult in that aspect because the artists change and all that, as you well know. I forgot who did the Captain America with his being extremely buff, But I mean, it does happen a lot in comics because Mysterio.
That's not a continuity error. That's just a bad drawing of Cap.
Yeah, that's a good point. But there's one that I remember saying that Mysterio had these robots of the X-Men. And in one of the comics, you see it's showing Mysterio's lair, and you see these old school yellow and blue X-Men costumed robots, and you're like, "Whoa, that was way back when." See, it's kind of more of a callback, but I guess when it's easy to notice them when they're short, but when you're doing that big of a leap, that was over 40 years. I mean, but still it's kind of hard to tell, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to follow me sometimes, I know.
We got you. We're still within the same continuity,
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about continuity almost as like a bonus feature rather than like
Exactly.
the bulk of the material, and I think
Slightly
that
Easter
there's
egg in a
definitely
way.
a good point to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, that was cool. We just like touched on that thing again.
exactly. Little Snelly, do you know any examples of continuity errors in comics that we could think of?
This one's hard because so many, of course, of the comics that I like refer to are always going to be multiverses, which I think is a genius way to do some lazy editing on your storylines, where you could be like, oh,
Right.
that was a different one. Admittedly, my biggest continuity error is whenever you look at it's the Betty and Veronica Archie series where they get flip-flopped with Pamela Isley and Harley Quinn, like they like switch universes. It's a very weird crossover universe. It's DCX Archie, and one of the biggest continuity errors that they do is that one is specifically based off of a Harley and Ivy comic series that happens where you've already established that they are definitely dating and involved with each other, but Archie Comics after the buy-in said, they're besties, we're not doing that with our Veronica. And so they crossed over and completely like rewrote their relationship and their prior experiences before the flips, and that ruined quite a bit of my enjoyment in the series and what was otherwise a very fun kind of kooky crossover.
Yeah, I think where I was more so saying about Easter eggs, because I think I was more so going Easter egg, because it can be an Easter egg, but I guess I don't really pick up much on errors per se. Like, actually, he was holding it with his left hand.
But sometimes it's not even errors, right? That are the big continuity problems, right? When in the first Avengers movie, right? When Philip Coulson dies, spoilers for a movie that came out in 2012, y'all. But when Philip Coulson dies and they revive him in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I read an article shortly afterwards where Joss Whedon talks about like how he felt about that, and like first off, fuck anything about how Joss Whedon feels. I don't like him as a person, but he did have a point in this one scenario as a director, right? That it cheapened like the loss of Philip Coulson in overall, right? Because like you would see that, watch the movie now, and you're like, oh, but he still comes back in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you know, and then you have all this kind of stuff that happens there, and there's no way to really look at it, I think, especially when you're watching that movie over again, that it didn't cheapen the loss of Philip Coulson. And I think that was not necessarily an error, right? That is the continuity of the Marvel Universe, but that was a choice that they made that did affect the rest of the continuity, and did especially affect the rest of the continuity really kind of going backward, right? Do you think that there's any other big examples like that where there was a choice in there that really ended up affecting the rest of the timeline and in kind of a way that lessened the impact of the story?
It's a very tough question. I was just thinking about like Harrison Ford. He had a mark right here, and they gave the kid that same mark on Indiana Jones, but that's not that. I'm trying to think how it actually affected the story. That's a very interesting question.
Yeah. Little Snelly, do you have any examples of times where like the continuity of there was a choice that was made throughout there that ended up affecting the impact of the story going forward, and kind of in any ways that kind of just kind of lessened the impact of what stories had done before? I don't know if that's a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, no, I'll agree perfectly, and it ties back into a previous conversation that we had on Book of Boba Fett, which is that originally Boba Fett died. Like, when you see him die, you see his head cut off in that helmet, and then they like redid the scene, and then just like didn't have his head in the helmet, and I'm like, we all saw that. You can't get
that was Jango Fett when he's talking about that.
Jango Fett, yeah. It's just it cheapens that experience and that like emotional attachment that you have to it. I think your point about Agent Coulson is probably the biggest point on it, because I have since rewatched Avengers since knowing that, and I remember the first time I watched it being like, this is an incredibly traumatic moment. This is like the reason that we have the Avengers the way that we do. And then I rewatched it and I was like, this is a meaningless 10 minutes of this movie that is no longer important at all.
All that stuff about Boba, I mean, no need to get fed up about it, but
But this
you're like,
So
Kill me
funny.
now. But no, one thing I know from film, like, there has been actual continuity errors, not within the story of, like, Daniel Craig in one of the James Bond movies, he wore, like, driving gloves in many scenes, and they actually had CG artists have to take him out because there's a story element of his hand has to read the gun so he can use that specific gun. I mean, I know that kind of had effect because they had to spend so many hours CGing Daniel Craig's hands, but
Yeah.
story-wise, like, I can't really think of a prime
we
example.
even talked about this weekend or this the big success of Spider-Man No Way Home, right? Shows how like even we talked about a huge you could a plot hole, a continuity error that you could drive a car through. The whole reason that Electro would have to be brought into that universe was that he would have to know who Peter Parker was, and he even admits in the storyline, be like, I didn't know who you were. I thought you would be black. You know, all of those kind of stuff. There's got to be a black Spider-Man out there somewhere. Hint to Miles Morales. All of that kind of stuff. We know that he doesn't know who he was, and so there's no reason why Electro should have come there. Did that stop Spider-Man No Way Home from breaking all kinds of records?
Nope.
No.
Not at all. Right. So, like, there's got to be a spectrum of where this falls in importance of kind of making sure everything's together. I think that the MCU as a whole, keeping their continuity and kind of making sure things are important. Like, there are some plot holes there, but it is pretty tight across the spectrum of stories that they have, right? I think that there is certainly there's a degree that you have to get it right, and there's a degree that you can kind of fuck it up a little bit and still do good, you know?
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions that happens when a character enters. Like, there's so many questions people have about Cox coming into the MCU, you know? There's so many things that people want to know. Was he part of this? Why wasn't he? Did he get blipped? You know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. There's a lot. It seems like a lot of stuff that they're hopefully will cover, and they could probably cover it with one line. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. The whole aspect when it comes to Spider-Man No Way Home really, brings an interesting question of what is continuity now in this circumstances. Is like, are we saying all the events of Spider-Man in the first Spider-Man series happened in the past, and then there's a middle section, and then is there a timeline? Is Tobey's Spider-Man, he looks clearly older in the movie, the whole aspect of continuity. Is this all one universe? It's all, we've really, I guess, as far media in this day and age has really decided to play with the idea of continuity, is what I'm saying. Like, it used to be just a linear, making sure that everything happens in the correct order, right? In Star Wars, the Star Wars episode 4 started in the middle of episode 4, and they went all the way through to 5, 6, and then back to do the prequels, because they wanted to make sure they had a full continuity of how that story was told. Now, there was a reason they chose 4 in the beginning, because that they felt like that was the most complete story, but they knew that there was stuff to be told beforehand, and they knew there was going to be stuff to be told afterwards. And the whole aspect of it is that they wanted to tell a complete story from start to finish. Now stories can go through here and be like, what if we go back in the middle of our continuity, right? What if we go back and do Black Widow? Okay, let's do Black Widow, but let's do it between Civil War, and let's do it between there. And that movie is coming out way afterwards. And it's only going to pertain to one little part line of it. I don't know. I love what entertainment is deciding to do and play with continuity. What are some of your favorite examples of how continuity is being really challenged and played with in entertainment today? Little Snelly.
I think, and it's not just to harp on Marvel in the way that they've done it, but they've honestly done it so incredibly well that I love the entire universe that they're creating out of it, because the part about getting the continuity out of Marvel is also being interactive at the time that it's engaging you, right? Like, you have to watch their series in the orders in which they are coming out. You have to watch the movies that come out in between that, and it's like you're building this continuous universe, but it's also very interactive with the people around you, right? Like, had we not seen Spider-Man come out, it would have felt like we were very much in that FOMO period of missing out, as we're all around the water cooler at work, even though we're literally all at home right now. I can't think of another universe that has made people so attached to the timing of events the way that Marvel has done. Even as much as like everyone watched all of the Batman series and like trilogies that have come out, it still felt like you could watch those later and it wasn't as important.
Right, where everything landed within those universes. I mean, because it wasn't such a connected universe, right? Having everything, making sure that those things were lined up. You know, Marvel is in a way of making sure that there's parallel series. Ant-Man as a franchise, and Iron Man as a franchise, and Captain America as a franchise all exist within the same timeline. And so continuity becomes very, very important there. And I think continuity is incredibly important in movies that travel throughout time. I think, like, we discussed a lot of continuity stuff in Christopher Nolan films, right? Particularly Inception, right? Because a lot of the events that happen there, what happens beforehand, are they in a dream, are they not in a dream? Because there's a lot of things that they're playing with there. What was it, Interstellar? The one where they're going through time with Matthew McConaughey? That was a lot of one where they talked about continuity and what's happening beforehand, because those things, it was very, very important. There was an element they were playing with a lot within that universe. But in some, I think, like your example of Batman, those franchises were great, but there's not really the continuity is just linear. There's nothing challenging it, right? And there's nothing that is really dependent upon it also either. And with that being said, like it is just, yes, it has continuity and it needs to make sure it makes sense, right? You can't go through like the events of the third movie had to have like the death of Harvey Dent in there. Like that had to be an important thing that was talked about, because if it hadn't been talked about, you would be like, it seems like you missed the second movie. Why was the second movie even there? Where was the context of it, right? And so as long as you literally just checked the continuity boxes, you did it well, right? But we've advanced into entertainment now that really starts to challenge the idea of where that continuity goes. You have branching timelines. You have sometimes where you're going to start to tell a story not in chronological order. You know, you're going to go back through and you're going to tell one part of the story or someone else's part of the story, or maybe from a different perspective.
I mean, Book of Boba Fett is doing that in their last 3 episodes, in which they're telling you where is Boba Fett now, and then where was he before in order to start this. And that, I think, is a really great example of one that doesn't do it necessarily very great. I think another example who's been really challenged by that is the DCEU, the DC Extended Universe in movies. They have really, really struggled with how to get people engaged in continuity so that you can introduce these new characters and then also see them all together and then give 2 shits about them. I think that that's something they've really, really struggled with, is how to lay out characters with continuity and still get people engaged and interested in them.
Not to go on too far of a tangent, but the DCEU, especially when it comes to movies, have big continuity problems because they want to create a canon in a continuous canon, continuity-wise, with the most successful parts of the franchise. And not all of them are successful. In fact, very few of them are successable.
And
if you don't rhyme with Catman, you're probably not doing very well. You know, but that's about it. So if that's the case, you know.
But they also treat it like a child. Like they try to hold on to it so much. And I mean, with DC, I mean, they keep on rebooting and all that, and it just, people are tired of it. That's why people latched on to Zack Snyder, because they're like, this is a great universe and blah blah. Don't read the spoilers about the Flash plot, but like it's just like they just can't keep under wraps. But the thing about that made Spider-Man successful that I read about was Toby and Andrew literally said, "This is Tom's movie. We need to say the less we can about our characters because this is Tom's movie." But on a continuity standpoint, that was awesome, because the less you say, the better. They said, hey, we did this, but they did not delve into, oh, you know, we all had Venom, you know, or something like that. They just rushed over it, because hopefully they'll extend those universes. But like,
there were some things that they
genius.
actually took out from it because they didn't want to necessarily go into that as much, or they even recorded some lines, but then they ended up cutting them completely and not even going in that direction because, you know, they maybe want to save some of that stuff for later, or they, you know, just wanted to thought less is more. And I do think Spider-Man No Way Home did a great job of that for the most part. There were some parts that still were a little bit cheesy, But
Yeah, I mean,
but I do think, especially in the second viewing, those hit a little bit less hard.
mhm. Yeah.
But Cape, we asked Little Snelly earlier about who do you think is like the most been the craziest experiment so far in recent media with continuity? What do you think that is?
Oh, that's tough. That's really tough. It teeter-totters on Easter egg in a way, but I would say who has really played with it. I mean, Rick and Morty. I mean, of course, I didn't really think about that until now, but they have a lot of continuity callbacks and stuff like that. But they don't do time travel. I mean, I know you probably know it good and well, Dodd. They said they're not going to do time travel. They do kind of a Groundhog's Day, but it's not time travel per se. But I would say that probably is one that really sings loudly in my head. But also, I mean, the show Dark, but I mean, it's its own universe. But I mean, I think I want to know how, if someone gets a Marvel project, how it happens. Like, I've read stuff about the Loki director. I forgot her name. My friend Lucifer, that was on Chats a lot, he actually met her at school, and he said she actually got to help with like developing how timelines work and stuff like that. And in my head, I'm like, how, like, when you start a Marvel series, do they hand you a book of like, here's where all the characters were? Like, how do they keep everything in line? So my answer is probably Rick and Morty, but like, it's a hard task to keep hold of as a whole, as you all know.
Yeah, Rick and Morty has been to they're always been the kind of like bite their thumb their nose at sci-fi kind of situation, and continuity is just one of those things. I think the train episode had a lot of continuity jokes in there that were really great. Yeah, I think one of my favorite experiments, there's been so many things that have challenged the idea of continuity out there. I think Legion was one that challenged a lot of continuity by what is real and what is not real kind of situation. What was happening and what was not happening. I thought that one, especially that first season, I thought was really doing a lot of fun stuff with continuity and what was going on there. And I think honestly, X-Men being able to figure out how to actually do what DC's tried to do and peel off the bad parts and keep the good parts, that has been the best experiment with continuity that I've seen out there.
Futurama did it well too. I mean, they had a bunch of stuff there. I mean, but if you bring it to someone's mind, then they'll figure it out and all that. There's some aspects of like, oh, this would be funny, but should we bring it to someone's mind? Like, I think Community did some continuity stuff about the whole Beetlejuice thing when they said Beetlejuice 3 times. Yeah, I knew Nelly would know what I'm talking about, but
yeah, as soon as you said it, I was thinking about it. They say Beetlejuice 3 times in the show, which is technically not how the Beetlejuice things work, and then he passes by in the background.
Over seasons. But like, I mean, it can be very much satisfying, but at the same time, it's like, should you? Like, if you do that, people are going to do, well, actually, I mean, I don't know how Doctor Who handled it, but I know you said that a bunch of timey-wimey, I forgot the whole phrase.
Wibbly-wobbly nonsense.
Wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. That Doctor Who's been the master of continuity for the longest time. I mean, if you want to talk about people that experiment with continuity, it is Doctor Who 100%. But I mean, I think the one that I haven't heard too much of us talk about is Loki. I mean, think Loki with the variants and using time as a way to show the multiverse, right? I think that was a very, very, very interesting concept. And mixing those two elements, I think that in making all of this kind of happen in kind of a pocket adventure, right? Not just a pocket dimension, but like all of this is essentially happening in the continuity of the MCU in a timeline that's outside of time, that's outside of, essentially this is happening in between when I guess Loki ran off for a second with the Tesseract, anyhow.
But I mean, we knew it was going to get to this point. I mean, like having variants and all that is part of everything. And they did a good way of introducing the idea of it very well because, I mean, even reading the comics, it gets really confusing, but I think they introduced it to a general crowd very well.
100%.
And I'm ready for Kang.
Yeah, I'm ready to see what
Yeah.
season 2 brings for it.